Welcome to LCS Talks. I'm Berkley Glazer, and I'm the principal of Langley Christian Middle School. Today at the table, I have Kevin Mirchandani, who is my co-host, and as well, he is the director of instruction for our school, K-12. I have John Van Weelden back with us today. He's a high school teacher. He teaches robotics and aviation and computers and science. He's an amazing teacher. We have Eric Bylenga with us today. Eric's our director of IT. Amazing guy, does all of our problem solving, makes things work. Mm-hmm. We have Jon Kuehl with us, who is our grade 8 teacher who teaches explorations and our applied design skills and technology in aviation. And today we're talking about that topic, flight. So, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be joined by two Johns. So we're going to find some way to make sure that everyone knows who you are when we're talking. We may call you Kuehl and John. So something will come out in this talk here. We'll find something to identify you. And there's Eric, of course. So, John, we are really excited to have you, Jon Kuehl, and we would love to hear a little bit about your story. We've had an opportunity to connect with John Van Weelden in a previous episode. John, tell us a little about your story.
Hey, my story, I guess it starts with my parents, and it ends pretty quickly with me enjoying my time at school, but not really, because about grade 2 class, I think I was pretty much the class clown, if you haven't picked that up already. But I struggled. I struggled pretty hard in class, and got to the point where my teacher was like, "Hey, this kid's got some issues," and I'm like, "Yeah, I do." And so off I went, and I was quickly diagnosed with dyslexia, and reading and all those things were really, really difficult. But there were a lot of other things that I was probably more gifted at. I know my parents really struggled with some things that I was probably better at, and one of those things was the classic, "Hey, we bought something at IKEA and it needs to be put together." My dad needed instructions for a hammer, so he got me to usually put together those sets. And so that's always been kind of one of my focus in life. Like, one thing that I really enjoy, and that kind of just led me down a path of like, hey, figuring out kind of what God's kind of pushed me to be, how he's taught me to learn differently and see the world kind of differently than a lot of people do.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, John. So tell us a little bit about what got you interested in aviation. I don't know a ton about aviation. Basically, the only thing I know is my brother-in-law brings out his drone every summertime, and we go out to our family cabin in Alberta, and he just takes the most amazing pictures of the point, this kind of outcropping piece out on the lake, Lesser Slave Lake. But tell us what got you interested in aviation.
Well, it's probably one of my friends. He is really into aviation. He got himself into a website which is called Flight Test, which is pretty much is a great access point actually to aviation. You can go out to your local dollar store, pick up some foam board, cut this foam board to mix and match different wings and different body types, and you put some a LiPo battery in there with some motors, and boom, you've got yourself an airplane. And so he really got me excited about, hey, this is something that's quick and easy. It's a lot of fun. You can try different things. It doesn't cost a lot because, let's be honest, I crash a lot. And so repair is easy with a little bit of glue and a little bit of foam board. Bam, you're back up and you're flying again. So to me, it's been one of those hobbies that you can be really intentional about trying things and not being worried about the cost. It's also like really fun to kind of try things that are out that's new and see if it works.
That's awesome. Thanks, John. So we had an awesome conversation with John Van Weelden and Matt Gross a couple episodes back. Our listeners may have tuned into that conversation. John Van Weelden, I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of a recap on that. You had some pretty compelling ideas about who God is as creator and our invitation to participate as co-creators in the created order. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the ideas you talked about and just reorientate us back to this biblical vision of learning and technology?
Yeah, so last time I kind of summed up some of the thoughts I often share with students, especially when I'm trying to get them to not be passive about technology, but take a role in the development of technology. And the key point that I often talk about is that when God put Adam and Eve in the garden, he didn't just give them a passive role. He told them to till the garden and keep it. So basically upkeep it, allow it to flourish, unfold creation. And in that sense, we are co-creators with God and we are co-rulers with him as we start to, as we continue to develop all the things we develop, cities and transportation and vehicles and airplanes and all of that. But I guess the flip side to that is the story isn't all flowers and gardens, but as technology is developed, sin creeps into that process as well. And so that's the flip side of not being passive about creation. We can make really poor designs as well. Just thinking about flights on the mind, me and my students this term have talked a lot about some of the recent events with some of the airplanes going down and computer software mistakes that have led to sensor errors, which have led to pilots feeling uncomfortable in the air and eventually some crashes as well. So God gave us this technology, but he also gave us a huge responsibility to be rulers over it and developers of it and encourage human flourishing rather than destruction. So. Yeah,
Awesome points. Thanks, John, for recapping that. So about 3 years ago, as a school, we were kind of just sitting around and saying, hey, what could we be unique about? What programs could we have that only Langley Christian School would be offering? And we took a look around our geographic location. Here we are. We're in Langley, actually in Murrayville. We're right beside the airport, Langley Airport. We're actually in restricted airspace right over top of our school. Planes flying, helicopters flying around. So we thought, hey, flight, maybe that's something we could do. So in June of 2019, we actually sent some of our staff, and Eric and Jon Kuehl were two of those members who went down to Colorado to a workshop that was all around flight training and working with kids on that. So I'm going to get Eric and John to share what they brought back from that take. So I'll start with Eric.
Yeah, I mean, that was an amazing trip. I mean, I think first of all, for me, it was really exciting to go to a school that was really into their STEM program. I'm a big technology guy myself, so it's just really cool to see even their biomedical lab that they had there. That was pretty amazing. They had a full flight strip there. They had lots of laser cutters and all sorts of tools to make drones and airplanes. I think the key takeaways that I took from that trip was it's just a really exciting and accessible thing to get into. I mean, the drones are becoming more advanced. It's becoming lower cost. Like John was mentioning earlier, it's very inexpensive to make mistakes, and so that's exciting. The creativity too. Like I remember them showing us just the crazy designs that some kids had built and stuff that just shouldn't have flown, but it actually did. And then even coming back, we took our drones and our planes back home with us. And we came, I think it was in the Salt Lake City airport, but the pilots that were walking around, they're like, hey, what do you got there? What is this? Mm-hmm. And our overhead baggage, we had so much stuff that we're carrying. Our planes got first class treatment. They got to go sit up front with the high rollers there. So they were really interested. They were really excited with what we were doing. And it was just cool to see other people get excited about what we were getting into. Awesome. All right, John.
Yeah, for me, it was seeing this innovation center clearly had resources beyond compare. But to me, my takeaways were just the amount of the excitement that the students had for each of their different designs that they were doing. They had the ability to really research, to design, to test, to fly, to do all of these things that are so crucial, I think, to kids. In the discovery and of who they are, the gifts and abilities that they have, and also to do real life application. They were doing things like actually flying for real estate agents and doing flights around certain properties. They had a contract from geotechnical place. Yeah. Thank you. Doing mapping of certain valleys. They had another contract that they actually did from the U.S. military that they weren't allowed to talk about, but they could tell us that pretty much they had to make a drone that had a certain flight characteristics so that they could basically shoot missiles at it. So, I mean, it was just really neat to see how much the kids had for the ability to design and to create, but also have real life applications into it and actually have real impact in their community.
Sounds like some pretty enormous potential for learning in terms of risk and making mistakes, learning from working together, and actually seeing this embedded in a real life context. That's really exciting to me. We've been talking about over the last number of weeks what it looks like to be innovating and using our giftings to actually be stewards as we innovate as well too. And so just a little bit of a recap for our listeners here. We've got our LCS technology guiding principles, and we've been talking about innovation and imagination versus indifference, and John Van Weelden and Matt Gross spoke a little bit to that. Eric's brought up a number of things from the accountability versus surveillance piece. Today, I'd love for both our Johns here to explore two ideas. John Van Weelden, I'd love for you to look at for us and paint a little bit of a vision of this filling versus emptying principle. And Jon Kuehl, if you could walk us through wisdom versus law. So John Van Weelden, up to you, over to you first here. Give us a little bit of a vision of this idea of filling or abundance, this image of a garden versus emptying the desert. What does that look like in terms of the implications for technology usage?
Yeah, so focusing mostly on flight, I think it's pretty easy for us to think about all of the things that flight opens us up to as far as the flourishing of society. I have family that lives a long ways away, and if I lived 100 years ago, it'd be a lot more difficult for me to get to them. So flight is, it's helping us explore different parts of the world, opening up doors that we wouldn't have had 100 to 200 years ago. But also there's a lot of question marks and destruction that is related to flight. Thinking specifically about drones and unmanned air vehicles and how rapidly that technology has come up. It's also led to technology being developed in kind of an unregulated space. And there's a lot of questions about how do we fill that space with regulations that are wise enough to allow us to behave responsibly with unmanned air vehicles. So this is something that we talk about in my class, which maybe we'll detail out a little later, but the ethics around all of these vehicles as far as use in warfare, people's privacy concerns. When we fly our drones in our class and there's other people around, immediately heads are being turned. And even if there aren't cameras on our drones, people are like posing for pictures and like expecting to be spied on. So how do we navigate this space of drones and flight technology where people feel comfortable, people feel like this technology is helping our society and flourishing our society, and not get to the space where people are looking at us as pilots and as people in aviation as kind of the mysterious people who knows what they're up to, and kind of treating it as that desert space of the unknowns.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting, and I want to come back to that idea in a moment here about what you're doing specifically in your classes, but you've brought up this idea of without a real world connection and context, it's really challenging for students to make those ethical judgments and decisions, to see them actually a part of their lives as well too. So I want to explore that in a moment, but John, I want to go to you, Jon Kuehl, to talk a little bit about this idea of wisdom versus law, and to give us a bit of a vision of what that looks like with technology usage.
Well, I mean, obviously there's certainly a lot of laws out there to kind of help to kind of protect the air and the restrictions that are around airports and stuff like that. And I would just say too that there's a lot of things that are in a gray area as well. And I think as a Christian community, I mean, we've talked about, hey, what can we do as a school that best prepares our students, as well as like even the consumption of things. We wanted to have airplanes or to have drones going, but there's so much that we could be purchasing, so much that we could be buying, so much that we could be doing that we really needed to have a good focus and to be mindful of the time and resources that we have. So not only just this idea of like, hey, we can't fly by the airport, we can't really fly by our school. But let's also think about, well, what's the purpose? What's the reasoning behind our flying? What's the reasoning that we want to do flight or in drones? And then how can we use that to best help other people? That's kind of our focus and what we kind of wanted to do in the future, our building our program.
Yeah. So what makes it so important for a Christian school community to be looking at this concept of drones and aviation? Like, what does flight have to do with Christianity and our formation?
To me, I think the creativity part is huge, but I got really excited when we were down in Colorado. One of the things that the kids had done was build a drone that could deliver an anti-venom to places in the middle of Africa. And they'd be able to deliver this thing, life-saving anti-venom for a kid who had been bitten by a snake where there was be no chance before this. To me, I look at like having both males and females both excited about this innovation part, right? There's so many things right now, a big push to get girls into aviation, to get them into classrooms and get them into spaces where they are innovating and flying. And I think, to me, having both genders in this kind of field is huge. And I think it's more representative of what God's kind of wanted us to do. So, I mean, there's a responsibility, I think, for what we have to do with exploring these different things that allow us to be creative. And as Christian people, I think it just shows who God is.
Yeah, and just adding to that, I think with my experience with Flight Test 2, it seems like it's the aviation community is just that. It's a community, and especially if you get involved with the educational side with like Flight Test and programs like that, it's a community of people that are passionate about this technology. But that community also needs to be good neighbors to people around them and to practice safe flight. And I guess just being a neighbor in that sense is cherishing that Christian value. And and the more we understand, the more everyday people understand how this technology works, the more people will have ideas like what you were talking about with like delivering medicine to isolated places, or even you're thinking about BC, we have tons of remote communities. How could our students think about ways to help remote communities in our area? And just the more people that are familiar with this technology, the more variety of ideas that we'll have to help our communities and find solutions for problems that we haven't thought about using aviation for before.
Awesome. Good stuff. All right. Let's talk a little bit about what is actually happening in your classes. And so not only the what, but also your design cycle and design process that you take the kids through. So let's start with middle school, grade 8, John, and tell us what you're doing, and then we'll jump over to high school.
Yeah, so for us in middle school, we work pretty much exclusively on airplanes. And so we start off with just like a chuck glider, a 3-dimensional chuck glider, where the kids have to learn the different properties of center of gravity and how to properly weight something, and what is it, all the different parts of the planes, and how actually construction works. And so we really go from research, design, then we do some design, we do create, and then we test it. And it's always fun. Testing day is always probably the fun day, where kids are like, all right, let me go up on top of, we got a space net. The kids throw it off the space net, which is probably 30 feet off the ground. Watch this plane kind of fly around, and they have different properties based on the way that they actually created and made their plane. And so we can go back then and say, hey, why? Why did this happen? And we do some more research, and then it just goes through that whole cycle over and over again. So we start with those chuck gliders, and then we work our way up to actual planes that we put motors on, and we attempt to fly. And some are great, and some kids realize, oh, actually, this when I put these things together, I need to work a little harder at the construction. So there's always learning every stage we do.
Yeah. John, how does this fit in some of our programming and explorations and some of the patterns and cycles of students cycling through some of these learning experiences?
Yeah, so I get the kids, I do twice as long of an exploration than what most of the other kids do. So we'll do a double time, which is that's 2 90-minute blocks, and I'll get them for probably about 8 times. And so it allows for kids to be a little bit more intentional about what they're doing. It is an ADST type block, so it's a longer time, but it's really cool because you can do multiple projects over that course of the time period.
Also, John, can you tell us, for the listeners, what the product is that the kids in grade 8 are working with, and maybe tie in the laser cutter?
So yeah, we use the foam board from just the dollar store. It has to be Adams. Adams is the best. # Adams foam board. But we use that, and we throw that into a laser cutter that we have purchased from an innovation grant, and that laser cutter actually just follows the actual pattern that we can get it done through like a Adobe Illustrator, and kids can they can experiment with that. They can change and manipulate through Adobe. But yeah, it's a really neat thing where you can vary the depth at which you want to do either an engraving, or you can cut all the way through, or really be creative in that sense using that laser cutter.
Awesome. And one more point is that before they actually start using the remote controls, you actually teach them on flight simulators.
Absolutely. We've got 2 TVs set up with some flight simulators so they can get some stick time, because if you can imagine some stick time. So you can imagine that, kids, well, the first time they get on that the remote control, they are terrible. They're crashing instantaneously. So they realize quite quickly that movements need to be of a certain nature, and they get used to that a lot better when they have time on stick time with the flight simulator.
Awesome. All right, cool. All right, John V., tell us about high school. What you're doing?
It's actually very similar, a lot of parallels to what Jon Kuehl just said, except we work mostly with quadcopters, so 4 motors, 4 propellers type vehicles. And we are doing the same thing where we're researching and understanding the context of these vehicles. We are learning about things like Bernoulli's principle and lift and weight and thrust, and things like the principles behind it before we actually dive in, and then we construct the vehicles. We have to learn. For these vehicles, we use acrylic frames that can also be laser cut on our laser cutter. We add motors to the frames. We need to learn soldering skills to mount the motors to electronic speed control and flight control board. And then from there, we can add props and start to spin up the motors and start to experiment with the lift and start to learn how to control these devices. We also do add cameras to our devices as well, so that not necessarily for videography, but more for first-person view flight. So experiencing that feeling of looking through the camera on the device and learning how to fly that way as well. So yeah, it's a brand new program. This is the first year we ran it, but I think it's already a huge success, and students love that, building a drone from scratch and having that experience.
Yeah, what are some of the questions that you guys are exploring in your class, and what do some of those conversations look like in terms of their connections to the learning?
Yeah, so we do a whole unit, a continuing unit, as we are developing these drones about what planes have been used for in the past, what is in the emerging technologies around planes, the cutting-edge technologies of unmanned vehicles and how those are evolving. And we just have very frank discussions about how do you feel about these vehicles and how they have been used in war? How does taking a person out of a vehicle, how does that... There's a lot of gray-lined ethical areas where there's more prone to casualties, unknown casualties, or if the view of the camera isn't quite right, the weaponry can be fired or misfired in wrong directions. But then we also just bring it close to home too, and talk about topics like, do you want these drones delivering packages to your front door? How will these things be incorporated in our neighborhoods in the future? And it's such a fast moving technology that students really, it's up to them really, because this is going to be the technology that they're familiar with to develop and have opinions about how these things should be used. So we have a lot of really fascinating discussions and debates in our class as well, along with the applied skills and the actual building of the technology.
So John and John, why should students be involved in aviation and drones learning? And what does this have to do with our growing in our faith?
Well, I just think that Christian thinkers and engineers should be in the forefront of this conversation, and we should be thinking ahead to how we can be involved with engineering and design related to drones and aviation. So, getting students familiar with the skills that are needed to construct these drones, and getting them to think about what materials we can use and where we can locate these materials and use creativity to build these drones, I think is incredibly important first step for them to think about how can I be involved in the aviation community in the future. And we've taken field trips to the airport this term, and immediately the older generation at the airport that's hanging around is just craving for young people to get involved and jump in and to take the charge on some of these new initiatives. And I think as a Christian school, that's a really cool opportunity for us too, to just be a neighbor to these to the airport, and a neighbor to what they're doing there, and growing relationships and having discussions about flight along the way.
Yeah, to me, I look at it like every new technology, we have a choice. I think we can either bury our head in the sand, or we can totally embrace it and find ways that we can honor God in all the things that we do. Mm-hmm. To me, I look at the innovation and the impact that this innovation has had on communities that are far away, whether it's the one where we're dropping medications off, or it's land surveying and figuring out what's best for the environment in certain areas, right? So to me, I just look at, why would we not be fully invested in areas where we can find great ways to be God honoring in the gifts and abilities that we have, in our creativity, in the way that we can use the environment and use technology to help us understand more about the environment, or more about, hey, how can we help each other out, whether that's in medical reasons or in any other communications part. I just think there's so much to be gained when we have Christian community thinking about ways to be creative and to honor Him in all that we do.
Great stuff. All right. Thank you, John and John, for participating today and just giving us some great insights into this topic. Just in closing here, as we're wrapping up, this is our last episode of Season 2. I just want to ask Eric and Kevin, and we're just to reflect a little bit about some key takeaways that they've learned, and myself, from this season. So I know for me, I'll start with going back to our episode with Jessica Van Brumelen, and just how important it is to have female influence in this area. So for me as a principal, to really convince our female teachers to get involved in teaching these courses and to teach the kids, and for our female students to actually want to get engaged and continue the learning process as they move from middle to high school. Eric?
Yeah, I think for me, I had an answer, and I think I'll revise it now. I think what I've taken away, just in listening to some of the other podcasts and participating in a few myself, really coming back to the idea that every aspect of our lives should come under the lordship of Christ, and technology is no different in that regard. And I think sometimes we can view technology as a technological problem. So we solve technology with technology, but really it comes back to the relationships that we have with each other and the relationship that we have with our maker. And I think in any piece of technology that we use, whether that be drones or whether that be AI we talked about distance ed, and just how to deal with student devices and that sort of thing. This is all the same thing. We need to develop relationships with our Lord and with each other, and that can help us view how we use and view technology.
Thanks for that overview and survey of all of our learning and discussions, Eric. That's really helpful. We have gone on a really long journey of looking at the social emotional piece, talking about how we are good digital citizens. You've invited us to think about different ways to build relationships and have conversations about technology. So this has been a lot of learning for me, I think, in terms of thinking about the scope that technology has in terms of our own formation. So I think first, I'm really excited about how this has opened up other ways to think about our own formation. So I'm excited for season 3, where we're going to be talking about faith, identity, and Christian formation, and the different aspects that form us as we work as a learning community to develop and grow in our faith. So the things that stand out to me, I think, from our season in terms of my own learning was this idea of moving from fear to hope. That would be one where I would add another principle in our LCS guiding principles with technology usage, that we can be communities of hope, that we don't actually have to live in fear as we think about responsible stewardship of technology, as we think about how we partner with one another, as we invite these conversations to grow as a community. I think these are really formative kind of conversations as we think about how we'll use technology. And it's not something that we need to be fearful about, but it's one that we need to find hope in as we develop new and creative ways to navigate the conversations. The other part that was really important to me that stood out was that there is a big responsibility for a Christian learning community to think about how we'll steward the resources that we have in our community, whether that's technology or in the wider sense of the resources that we have, from connecting people to other experts in the field, and to how to be invited into learning in real life kind of context too. So I think there's a real level of stewardship that needs to take place when we use our technology and put it in its rightful place too. So this has been a really great season of learning and growing in our conversations. We so appreciate all of our experts that have come in and our own in-house speakers. And this is hopefully for you listeners another formative journey that you get to go on in terms of thinking about the role of faith, identity, and technology.
All right. We want to thank you listeners for being with us this season. And remember, you can communicate with us. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us on podcast@langleychristian.com. Thank you so much.